God, this stops. This needs to stop. Hi all, welcome to week 7? It's Victorian week, and I don't know about you, but when I think of like British, I think of the Victorian era. So I had a lot of fun looking at artsy pants things during this week, but I was also really taken by the idea of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert and their relationship. It's something that's really famous in British pop culture, kind of, but I didn't know very much about it. And since I had gotten so excited about healthy marriages when I learned about George III, I figured that I'd follow that again. Maybe because we're getting closer to the end of the program, I'm lonely and stuff, and I want to know about people who love each other. I think it's really dorky. This is probably better for a personal vlog, isn't it? Yeah. This is a very theatrical week for me also, to be sure, because the 3 things that I went out and did with my time were take a good long hard look at the Prince Albert Memorial in Hyde Park, which is almost hilariously opulent. It's so obviously this exusion of love and obsession and pride and mourning, and I was actually really into it. It didn't hurt that I went on a sunny day and all of the brassy gold gorgeous tones were just Then my roommate Claire and I took the Jack the Ripper London Walks tour. Now, the London Walks team does several walks every day around different historical eras, but the Jack the Ripper walk every evening is by far their most popular. We had an amazing time. It was very creepy though, so I'm glad that I went with somebody else. And then the 3rd thing I did was finally, I feel so bad for going so late, but I finally went to the Victorian Albert Museum, V&A again, which is about a mile walk away from our house and is one of the biggest, most comprehensive museums of stuff in Britain. And so I nearly killed myself walking around the thing, but it was gorgeous and I learned a lot and I took too many photos, and I'm very excited to show them all to you. Aren't you lucky? Prince Albert Memorial is bigger than you think it is. However big you're thinking, it is bigger than that. I was actually kind of living for how intensely gorgeous it was, and I'm really lucky that I went on a sunny day when the light was playing off all of the brass and gold and jewels that are crusted all over this thing. I also loved how different it looks from every angle. Albert looks heroic and stately and princely no matter how you look at him, and I really do think that was the intention, that no matter what way you came from this memorial, you would see that. I was also really interested in the decor surrounding it, such as the 4 pillars that are representative of the continents upon which the British Empire had a presence, and the fact that Albert is looking directly out onto the Royal Albert Hall across the street, so he can keep an eye on it. Additionally, right off of the back of his statue is the Princess of Wales Memorial Walkway, which is also part of this memorial, and it's this gorgeous flower-lined lane, and I really just think that all of these choices put together were so deliberately in celebration of his life. Okay, we're gonna go straight from the cute into the creepy here. The Albert Memorial is light and beautiful, right where the Jack the Ripper walk was dark and dirty and awful. It really showed the difference between the 2 sides of British culture and British status at the time that Victoria was reigning. Because of how popular this walk is and because of how many fake walks there are, I wasn't able to take very many notes on the trip for privacy reasons, unfortunately, and it's hard to remember what some of these pictures are from without those notes, but we got a really in-depth, interesting analysis of each of the 5 of Jack the Ripper's victims, with particular emphasis put on the last, who was the most brutally murdered. We also learned a great deal about the problems of this era, that while the Prince Albert Memorial is indicative of one side of Victoria's reign, this walk, murder and death and prostitution and alcoholism and disease are another facet. Funnily enough, this walk took place in very much the same place as the medieval walk did, which I found kind of uncanny. Everything comes full circle eventually. I also was interested to learn that the house in which his final victim was so brutally murdered and eviscerated, basically. It's now student housing for university students. I don't think I'd want to live there. And that his murder was never solved, and though there are many hypotheses, the poverty of evidence and the lack of forensic science at that time have meant that this case will probably never be solved. In any case, I'm very happy that I had Claire along with me because we were getting super freaked out. I think it's really important to realize that everything wasn't hunky-dory, tea and cakes at this time. Like 1 in 10 women we learned during this walk were prostitutes. Everyone was diseased, syphilis was a big problem, gin was killing people, and they weren't getting help. You know, it makes me think of now a little bit in that there is this extremely huge class of poor people who are suffering, and then there are the few and the wealthy, and I'm kind of surprised and also kind of not, based on all the research I've done during my 2 months here, that is a thing that still exists. And you gotta think too, Victoria was cute and she was a young queen and she reigned, wisely and well, but she was anti-suffragist. She did not believe that lesbians existed and wasn't perfect. I think while I agreed on my recanting of the idea that George III was a shitty king, based on what people heard from me, I think that people might look at Victoria with a bit too much idolatry. But that's just my opinion as a silly American who's only been here for 2 months. Let's go to the V&A. I feel so lucky to have the V&A right next door. Walking right in, the first thing I saw was a sculpture from a man from Seattle, and I felt right at home to begin with. Now, this place has 16 miles of corridors, and so I naturally didn't see all of it, but I stopped at a few highlight places, especially exceptional sculptures and artifacts from a variety of places around the world. Highlights included a notebook of Leonardo da Vinci's and a plaster cast of the statue of David, which is so much bigger than I originally thought it was. I cannot believe that was carved out of one piece of marble. No wonder it's such an exceptional treasure. I also spent some time looking at Islamic and Buddhist art because it's an area that fascinates me, and then moved right on into the realm of Victorian fashion, which I was really looking forward to because on the other side of the prostitution line were the ladies of the court, and they spared no expense. This is a time known for fancy fabrics, extremely small waists, and luxury, which I think is particularly stunning considering the technology they had available at the time. I also paid my respects to the Mantua gown, who really defies all structure and physical logic. I don't understand how ever anyone stood in that, let alone walked or sat down. I also saw this really radical pair of shoes from the 70s. Then I finally moved into actual British artifacts such as the Bed of Ware, which is supposedly able to sleep 7, Henry VIII's writing box, and howls full of jewels and silver and cutlery and ceramics and couches and all sorts of lovely, delicious Victorian things. I saw a couple of portraits I was really struck by and a few statues that I was really struck by, and was really kind of overwhelmed by the sheer amount of stuff that Victoria and Albert helped fund this museum's collection of. When I entered the actual Victorian section, I wasn't surprised to see that almost every image of Victoria had Albert and every image of Albert had Victoria. In fact, I only saw Victoria one time by herself, and Albert is never by himself. I think it's a little bit sweet and clearly indicative of the fact that their status as a royal couple was really popular in their day. The artifacts from the Victorian era are all opulent and beautiful, and in my opinion kind of problematic because almost all of them were copied or taken from other cultures and repurposed in this era. There's two sides to being worldly and adventurous, and sometimes one ends up harming the other, which I find really unfortunate. Victoria ended up being a far more gray character to me than I knew her as beforehand, as the small old queen who reigned wisely and well. She's got some issues and some baggage to her too, and seeing that in the museum was really illuminating and incredibly interesting. And regardless of how I feel now, I'm so happy that this is in my neighborhood, and so happy, no matter how exhausted I was, that I got to spend some time there. So, I had some really mixed feelings this week, some happy, some sad, and I think that part of that has to do with the fact that we're closer to the modern day in the Victorian era. Like, there's traces of that, echoes of that now that, like, we still see and we still feel, even and maybe especially in the US, at least compared to the other eras that I've studied, because we were kind of growing up together at the same time. And it's interesting to see the darker side, I think, of British history, and it's something that I don't know if I've been actively avoiding, but it's certainly not something I've sought out. And I get a feeling that when I do the Windsor or present day era next week, it's going to come back again, because Lord knows I am acutely aware of the struggles going on in the present day, as are we all. So if you're looking forward to hearing that, and let me tell you, it's going to be a doozy. I look forward to seeing you then. So thanks for listening. Live your best lives and be good.